Titanfall 2 reminded me how much fun a first-person shooter from this decade could be, and made me smile a lot in the process. Honestly, I'm surprised at just how much I enjoyed everything about Titanfall 2's campaign, which is what I will be talking about for this video. I would love to review the multiplayer component, but since my internet is garbage some of the time, I figure it would be best to talk about the main campaign and the main campaign only, since I can't really give a fair review of the multiplayer aspect. I will say right now though that people are still playing the multiplayer parts of this game, so for those wondering, yes, you can go play it and it is still alive. I think the best way to sum up Titanfall 2's story is that it blends the best feelings of science fiction military novels, big budget action blockbusters, and mecha anime all together. And even though it does have the heavy anime influence and feel, it decides to have fun with itself instead of focusing on making a reference or Easter egg apparent every 5 or so seconds. It chooses to be its own thing rather than rely on and copy what it was inspired by. I love the fact that the story of the game is just one small section of a giant conflict going on in the universe. The story follows Rifleman Jack Cooper, a skilled grunt who fights on the front lines. In universe, there are elite soldiers known as pilots. Pilots are troops that are able to change the tide of battle, and one of these soldiers, a pilot by the name of Ty Lastimosa, has chosen to train Cooper in the ways of being a pilot. After a routine drop into combat goes wrong, Cooper is knocked unconscious and Lastimosa is killed. With his dying breath, Lastimosa transfers command over to Cooper, along with the ability to pilot his Titan, BT-7274. After this, Cooper and BT slowly make their way across the planet, trying to meet up with higher command and figure out just what the enemy forces of the IMC are plotting. The story has a very good sense of how to use the writing tool Chekhov's gun. Anytime something is shown in the game, it comes back into play later in the story, even if it's only for a moment here and there. Nothing is just dropped out of nowhere, and that was a refreshing change from how some games just completely lose track of something. The story is a bit loose in terms of constantly being fed to you, but I actually really like that it was more visual and based on experience rather than constant exposition. They used the medium of it being a video game to be just that, an interactive experience for you to have fun in experiencing. You'll make your way across the planet's surface to regroup with other members of your rebel militia as you combat your way through IMC forces, while also fighting against a ragtag group of villainous hired mercenaries. The characters in this game help make it truly special. On paper, the game's story is just the classic anime trope of boy meets giant robot, but here, it's trained soldier befriends lonely mecha. Honestly, everyone was either incredibly likable or at the very least really interesting. The main protagonist is Jack Cooper, equal parts character and player self-insert. Cooper has dialogue, but it's influenced by the player's actions and choices in the game.
Pilot, your heart rate is accelerating. Are you in distress?
You could say that.
Your heart rate is exceeding 170 beats per minute. If possible, you should find a place to rest.
Yeah, I'll get right on it.
He can be snarky, sympathetic, cold, but in the end, Cooper is a really likable guy. He wants to do the best he can to save the day, and the bond he makes with BT is one of the best video game friendships I have seen in a while.
Understood. We'll get you transferred to a fully qualified pilot.
Objection. Cooper is my pilot.
While BT may be a combat mech designed with the sole purpose of wrecking things, he is so much more than that. BT had a lot of heart, but the game never goes out of its way to tell you how to feel about him. The bond you and Cooper build with BT feels incredibly natural, and there were certain moments in the later parts of the game that had me grinning like a fool at how wholesome they really were.
BT!
Got you.
BT, like Cooper, was incredibly humorous and had just the right amount of witty lines and humor to be kept from being stale or annoying.
Objective complete. We have rendezvoused with Major Anderson.
That's cold, BT.
Correct. Anderson's current temperature is 17 degrees Celsius, below the threshold of human survival.
While the other members of the militia outside Lastimosa aren't the most in-depth people I have met in a game, they all had some genuinely good moments that made up the lack of character depth or growth.
High air cannons active on the deck of the Malta. They must be disabled from the bridge before we can approach.
We're on it. Nice work, Coop.
Just doing my job.
This guy.
They are soldiers who come and go, but their personalities are what made them shine for their short on-screen appearances. The villains were an interesting bunch, and they were a lot of fun. This is where the over-the-top anime feel comes back into play, outside of Cooper being the fish out of water with his giant robot friend. They each had their own feel, crazed personality, and wonderfully theatrical introduction before you fought them.
You were not invited to Kane's party, and that's why you're dead. Well, another runaway hero.
Well, they weren't subtle in the slightest. They didn't have to be, since they were supposed to be seen as the maniacally laughing villain. The IMC, outside of being cannon fodder for you to gun your way through, really doesn't have that much character. The main commander of them only shows up for maybe twice max out of the entire campaign, and he was just kind of disappointing compared to the mercenaries. All the voice acting ranged from solid to downright perfect, especially Matthew Mercer as Cooper.
I hope I can live up to the honor.
And Glenn Steinbaum as BT.
Protocol 3. Protect the pilot. Reinitializing critical systems.
Who just absolutely stole the show with their portrayal as the characters. The game is just flat out fun, and there was not a single moment wasted on excessive downtime. The little bit of calm we got here and there was used to flesh out what was going on and the characters, and then it was straight back into combat or puzzle solving. I think me wanting to go back and replay the game again right after beating it while watching the footage for this review speaks volumes. The combat in this game is the definition of tight, and I always felt in control. Every weapon in the game had a serious punch to it, and I was always in good supply of ammo whenever I needed some. Shooting enemies with the game's various rifles, machine guns, pistols, and shotguns, among some of the other more experimental weapons, never got tiring. I always wanted to experiment with different combinations or tactics for taking out my targets, and I will say that not much else feels better than throwing a flaming ninja star grenade into a crowd of enemies than gunning down the stragglers who survived the explosion. Even though I did feel like I was in control for most of the situations I was in, this didn't mean the enemies were pushovers. The IMC forces put up a fair fight, and this is where the second combat playstyle of the game comes in, using your best friend, the Titan. BT is an absolute beast, but could still be taken down if you weren't careful in combat against other Titans. I cannot believe just how wonderful each of the heavy weapons BT got to use were. From ripping apart normal ground troops with a heavy machine gun, to using some of the laser or rocket weapons, down to the sword shotgun loadout combo, you bet I was playing around with absolutely everything the game gave me to use. The endgame minigun was just beautiful, and completely washed the bad taste of Turok's minigun out of my mouth. Not only were the main weapons a treat, but the secondary firing modes were a glorious second helping of destruction. While one side of the game was heavy combat, there was also a heavy helping of genuinely clever and well-designed puzzles on offer here as well. I would even go as far to say that some of these are just as clever, if not more so, than in games like in Portal or the like. It also helps that, like the rest of the game, they were incredibly fast-paced and required on-the-fly thinking. There was even a section of the game that reminded me of another overlooked game by the name of Singularity, and for anyone who has played that and plays this, you will know immediately why I say that when you get to a certain part of this game. Combine both of those things with a well-implemented, but never overused or forced wall running mechanic, along with some of your suit's abilities, and you got a game that features powers that feel more like the Crysis nanosuit than Crysis actually ever tried to do. You can boost jump, cloak, and hack enemy robots, but best of all, you don't die in 5 seconds to normal weapon fire like the pushovers in Crysis did. The controls were really solid and responsive, and it felt good to play it with either a controller or a keyboard and mouse. Either way is completely viable, and it never felt uncomfortable to use one or the other. Titanfall 2 is a really nice looking game, even on the medium to low settings. It's running on a heavily modified Source engine, but looks a heck of a lot better than most Source games do, and I couldn't even tell it was running on Source in the first place. The environments were simply stunning, and there were moments where I had to pause and take it all in, which is something I rarely ever do in a first-person shooter. The fact that the game didn't rely on grays, greens, and browns, instead opting for a more lighter palette of blues, yellows, and oranges was a really pleasant change, and one my eyes were pleased by. I'm just in awe at how each of the environments not only looked, but how different they were. There wasn't a single area in the game that felt similar to the last, and for a game where you do trek through various facilities, that's definitely saying something. Not only were the environments unique and different looking, but the Titans also had lots of really awesome variety to them. The boss fights in particular were really interesting looking, with each mech having their own paint job and style. The enemy forces went down like they felt they should, and had enough variety in their ranks that while it did feel like I was fighting ground troops that were uniform, they at least felt like competent ground troops. The enemy designs were the good kind of stock, where they felt like they were all uniform to their company. The robots scattered around the game were also pretty darn unique and fun to fight, and there was a moment with a service bot that made me giggle and feel really bad actually. I also really like the various wildlife the game has. It's just interesting to see all the ecosystem in play. Like I said earlier, the voice acting everything was really something special, and the music was no different. Each track fit perfectly with whatever I was doing, with more subtle sounds while I was dashing through the forest, or bombastic pieces when large-scale battles were happening. Each of the weapons sounded unique and like they should, and the environmental sounds were really impressive sounding and fit the world and atmosphere. With all that said, I think you know what I'm going to say about Titanfall 2. And if you don't, well, Titanfall 2 is absolutely wonderful and worth every penny of the $8 this game will run you for the PC version. The only sin that this game presents is that the campaign is only 3 hours long, but again, it's incredibly replayable, and it's such a wonderful weekend afternoon type game. I recommend you go out and get it, and if you are on consoles, it's even less expensive for you, so you have no reason not to play one of the best overlooked games from the past few years. I mean, see you guys, potentially coming out as well, so now is the best time to play it. Seriously, it's been a while since I've had this much fun with an FPS game. As always, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider checking out the rest of my channel or sharing this video with your friends. If you want to support the channel, I have a Patreon linked in the description below. A big warm thank you to the show's patrons, Project Nova and Gemstar Gold. They help keep the show running. If you have anything you want to see me review or just comments in general, let me know down below. Until next time, this is Thierry Williamson signing off.